Right now, your mind may be replaying an old conversation, turning it over like a smooth stone in a stream, looking for a way to rewrite the ending that never happened. Or perhaps it is the familiar, low-level hum of tomorrow's list, the quiet ticking of tasks you feel you should have already finished, even while your body is asking for the cool weight of the mattress beneath you. Maybe you feel the specific phantom weight of an iron lantern held in your hand, a heavy, rusted thing you refuse to set down, believing that if you loosen your grip for even a second, you will be left standing in a dark, unprotected place. You have walked with this burden for so long that your fingers have cramped into a permanent shape, a shape made for holding on, for bracing, for waiting for a storm that has not arrived. The air in the room is still, and there is a gentle safety here that asks for nothing. The shadows in the corners are soft, shifting slowly as the night deepens, and your breath is beginning to slow, finding a rhythm that is easier than the one you carried throughout the day. You do not need to do anything with this exhaustion. You do not need to label it, or fix it, or explain it to yourself. You are not broken because your mind refuses to go quiet. You are simply human, caught in the habit of believing that vigilance is the same as safety. Tonight, we will not try to force the mind into silence. We will not battle the thoughts that ask you to remain alert. Instead, we will learn how to hold that heavy lantern a little differently until you realize that you have the permission to set it down. What if the exhaustion you feel is not caused by the weight of the lantern, but by the endless energy you spend believing you must hold it? The mind does not become peaceful because you successfully defeat your anxieties. It becomes peaceful when you stop treating every thought as a command to be obeyed. You have been trying to light the darkness of your life by carrying a cold iron object, yet the light you truly need was never inside that lantern. It is a strange, quiet truth that the very thing you are fighting, the uncertainty of the future, the darkness of the unknown, is actually a doorway. You have been running from that doorway, afraid that if you enter, you will lose your way. But the Buddha once spoke of a traveler who realized that the path only appears when the traveler finally stops trying to illuminate it with their own trembling, desperate hands. You are safe enough to soften. The walls of this room are solid. The ground beneath you is steady, and the world will continue to turn while you finally let your hands rest. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. The problems that felt so urgent an hour ago are still there, yes, but they are not the same problems they were when you were fueled by adrenaline and the fear of missing something. When you are tired, the mind creates a distorted map of reality, making every small concern look like a mountain that must be scaled before morning. But you are not scaling mountains tonight. You are simply coming home to your own skin. If it feels right, notice the way your weight is distributed against the surface beneath you. Feel the texture of the fabric, the slight coolness of the air on your skin, and the way your heartbeat seems to be slowing to match the rhythm of the quiet house. You have been holding so much tension in your shoulders, as if bracing for a sudden impact. You might try, just for a moment, to imagine that you are loosening those invisible straps. It is not a failure to be tired. It is not a weakness to stop looking over your shoulder. For this brief time, you are allowed to be a person who is simply resting, rather than a person who is always preparing. This feeling of being on guard, of constantly scanning the horizon for things that might go wrong, is a clever trick of the mind. It tells you that if you just think about the problem enough, if you worry over it until the edges are worn thin, you will somehow prevent it from happening. It promises that your anxiety is a shield, but that shield has become heavier than the blow it was meant to deflect. And the most startling thing is that the shield is made of your own life force. You are using the precious, fleeting moments of your evening, the quiet hours that belong to your restoration, to build a fortress out of shadows. We will begin to look at this process differently. There is no urgency here. There is only the slow, steady process of observing how we have been holding our own lives. As you breathe, notice how the air enters and leaves without you needing to tell it how to flow. You do not command your lungs, and yet they know the way. You do not command your heart to beat, and yet it does so with perfect grace. Perhaps, if you can trust the body to rest, you can eventually learn to trust the mind to simply be. You might be wondering if you are doing this right, if you are letting go enough, or if your thoughts are still too loud. Please hear this. There is no right way to be in this space. If your mind wanders to tomorrow, that is simply the mind doing what it has practiced for years. You do not need to scold it. You do not need to pull it back with force. Just acknowledge the drift, like watching a leaf float down a slow-moving river, and then gently return your awareness to the weight of your body, the presence of this moment. You are not required to be enlightened tonight. You are not required to be calm. You are only required to be present with whatever you are feeling. Even if that feeling is a desire to be somewhere else, even that desire is just another thought, another visitor in the temple of your mind. We will sit with these visitors, offering them a seat, but we will not give them the keys to the house. In a moment, we will step into a story of a traveler, much like you, who carried a burden through a mountain pass, convinced that the path would vanish if they ever dared to close their eyes. This story may feel familiar, not because you have heard it before, but because you have lived it in the secret corridors of your own heart. It is the beginning of a shift, a way to see the iron handle in your own palm and wonder what might happen if you were to simply open your fingers. The dark is not a void, it is a canvas. And tonight we are letting the colors of your worry fade into the deep, restorative shade of rest. You are doing well. Just be here, in this breath, in this quiet, with nowhere else to go and nothing left to prove. In a high, narrow valley where the wind often carries the scent of damp moss and cold stone, there lived a traveler whose name had long ago been replaced by the rhythm of their own footsteps. This traveler was known to the villagers below only by the sound of a heavy iron lantern they carried, a clanking, rhythmic percussion that echoed against the canyon walls whenever they moved. This was not a lantern that held a flame. It was a cage of rusted, interconnected metal bars, housing nothing but a single, jagged piece of dark basalt. The traveler had found this stone years ago, and because it felt heavy and sharp, they had decided that it was a treasure of immense importance, something that must be protected, carried, and constantly accounted for. They moved through the mountain passes with a perpetual hunch, their shoulders permanently braced against the weight of the iron cage, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon for potential thieves or sudden changes in the terrain that might force them to drop their prize. One evening, as a thick, swirling mist began to swallow the jagged peaks, the traveler reached a small stone gate that marked the entrance to a hermit's dwelling. The hermit, a woman whose face was etched with the same lines as the mountains themselves, sat in the center of the courtyard, slowly grinding tea leaves with a wooden pestle. She did not look up when the traveler arrived, her movements remaining as steady as the slow turning of the stars. The traveler, exhausted and shivering from the mountain chill, clattered into the courtyard, their iron cage dragging heavily against the flagstones. They stood there, panting, their hands white-knuckled around the cold, rusted handle of the cage, waiting for the hermit to acknowledge the importance of the burden they were carrying. The hermit continued to grind the tea, the rhythmic thump-scrape of the pestle filling the silence between the gusts of wind. Finally, she looked up, her eyes clear and untroubled, reflecting the dim gray of the twilight. She looked past the traveler's face and focused entirely on the iron cage held tight against their chest. She pointed a withered finger toward the center of the courtyard, where a flat circular stone sat near a small pool of water. "Sit," she said, her voice like the shifting of gravel. "The tea is almost ready." But the traveler did not move. They were too afraid that if they sat, the cage might tilt, or the stone inside might shift, or they might somehow lose their grip on the thing that defined their journey. "I have come a long way," the traveler said, their voice rasping from days of solitude. "I have protected this stone through every storm and every crossing. It is the heaviest thing I have ever known, yet I dare not set it down." The hermit stopped her grinding. She reached into her robes and pulled out a small, empty wooden bowl, placing it on the ground between them. She did not ask the traveler to hand her the stone. She did not ask them to open the cage. She simply gestured to the bowl and then to the traveler's own clenched, trembling hands. "It is a long way to carry a mountain in a cage," she said softly. "But tell me, does the mountain need you to carry it? Or do you need the mountain to tell you who you are?" The traveler stared at the cage. In the damp cold of the courtyard, The metal felt biting against their skin, the rust flaking off onto their palms. They looked at the hermit, expecting a lecture on the folly of their path. But the hermit only returned to her tea. She poured a splash of hot water into the bowl, the steam rising in thin, dancing ribbons into the darkening air. The sound of the water hitting the wood was delicate, a sharp contrast to the dull, oppressive weight of the iron cage. The traveler realized that for all the years they had spent guarding the stone, they had never actually looked at it. They had been so focused on the feeling of the weight, on the anxiety of protecting it, that the stone had become a blur of shadow and obligation. With shaking fingers, the traveler shifted the cage, the iron groaning in protest. They looked inside the bars. There, sitting in the center of the dark basalt, was nothing but dust and a few dried petals that had drifted in from the mountain path. There was no secret treasure. There was no ancient map. There was only a piece of cold, hard earth that had become a prison. The traveler's breath hitched in their throat. A strange, hollow ache opened up behind their ribs, not the sharp pain of loss, but the terrifying, sudden lightness of realizing that they had been holding onto an emptiness for a lifetime. The weight they felt was real, but the necessity of the weight was a story they had whispered to themselves every morning to justify the exhaustion. The hermit did not speak. She simply pushed the bowl of tea toward the traveler, the warmth radiating from the wood. "It is a very heavy thing to hold on to nothing," the hermit remarked, her gaze returning to the mountains. The traveler looked down at their hands. The knuckles were raw, the skin calloused from years of gripping the iron. They stood in the quiet courtyard, the mist pressing against the walls, and for the first time, they noticed that the air was cool, the tea was fragrant, and the ground was perfectly capable of holding everything without the traveler's help. The cage felt suddenly absurd, a piece of theater that had lost its audience. But even then, the traveler did not let go. They remained standing, the cage still pressed against their chest, though their grip had softened just enough for the metal to rattle. They were terrified that if they set it down, they would disappear along with the burden. If they weren't the one carrying the heavy stone, who would they be? They would just be a person in a courtyard, drinking tea. And that thought, strangely, was the most frightening thing of all. The possibility of being nobody, of being unburdened, of having nothing to explain or justify. The hermit stood up and walked to the edge of the courtyard, where the mountain dropped off into an endless sea of clouds. She gestured to the vast, dark space beyond the wall. "The path ahead is just as uncertain as the path behind," she said. "But you are trying to use a cage to keep the world from changing. You are trying to use your anxiety as a map." She walked back to the traveler and gently touched the iron handle of the cage. "You think you are protecting the stone, but you are only protecting your own fear. The stone is just stone. It is the earth that is sacred." The traveler looked at the hermit's hand, then down at their own. They felt the cold weight of the iron. And then, for a heartbeat, they felt the warmth of the tea steam rising against their face. The contrast was startling. The cage represented the past, the repetition, the constant need to prepare for a danger that was already past. The steam represented the present, fragile, brief, and completely independent of the traveler's efforts. Slowly, the traveler's fingers began to uncurl. It was a slow, painful process, as if the muscles had forgotten how to exist without tension. The metal of the cage seemed to pull at their skin, clinging to the calluses it had created. But then, with a soft metallic scrape, the handle shifted. The traveler took a shallow, uneven breath, and for the first time in many years, they allowed their shoulders to drop, just an inch. The cage didn't fall, but it tilted, the weight shifting from the hands to the crook of the arm. It was a small movement, yet it changed the entire geometry of the scene. The traveler was no longer a person carrying a mountain. They were a person standing in a courtyard, holding something they were beginning to realize they didn't need. The mist continued to swirl around them, quiet and indifferent, offering no judgment, no applause. It simply invited them to be there, in the dark, in the damp, without the need to be anything other than a person who had walked a very long way. The next part of our journey will explore why the mind clings to such heavy objects, even when it knows they are filled with nothing but dust. You are safe here, and there is no need to rush the letting go. The traveler's experience in the mountain courtyard is not a call for you to discard the things you value or to become indifferent to the challenges of your life. It is not suggesting that you should stop feeling the weight of your responsibilities or that you must abandon the care you have for your future. Instead, it invites you to look at the iron cage itself, the way you hold your worries, the way you structure your internal defense, and the way you believe that the weight of the burden is the only proof that you are doing your job. There is a profound difference between carrying a responsibility and being shackled by a story about why that responsibility must remain a source of constant, crushing anxiety. In Buddhist wisdom, this is often described as the habit of carrying a second arrow. The first arrow is the reality of our lives, the uncertainty of tomorrow, the demands of our work, the inevitable challenges that arise simply because we are alive. That first arrow will strike from time to time. It is the nature of existence. But the second arrow is the one we fire into ourselves after the first has already hit. The second arrow is the story that says, I should be stronger, or I must prepare for every disaster so that I am never caught off guard, or if stop worrying, everything will fall apart. That second arrow is the iron cage. It is the extra weight we add because we are terrified of the emptiness of the unknown. When the traveler finally saw that the stone inside the cage was just a stone, they were not losing their treasure, they were gaining their hands back. You have been using so much of your inner energy to maintain a state of hypervigilance, and that exhaustion is not a sign of your failure. It is a sign of your dedication, but a dedication that has been misdirected. You believe that your anxiety is the shield protecting you from the dark, but if you look closely at that shield, you might find that it is actually preventing you from sensing the ground beneath your feet, the coolness of the air on your skin, and the reality that you are already navigating the darkness quite well, even without a lantern that refuses to light. This insight does not ask you to change your life overnight. It asks you to notice the grip. There is a quiet, radical shift that happens when you stop treating your thoughts as commands from a master and start seeing them as what they actually are. Mental events passing through the space of your awareness. When your mind says, you must worry about this, or it will never be resolved, that is not a truth. It is a suggestion. It is a voice that has been habituated to fear, a voice that believes safety is found in repetition and rehearsal. You have heard this voice for so long that you have forgotten. It is not the only voice in the room. The suffering we experience is often a result of trying to hold on to a version of the future that has not yet happened. We try to weave a tapestry of safety to wrap around ourselves, but the thread we use is made of our own present moment peace, and so we remain cold, even while working tirelessly to build a coat. The Buddha suggested that we are like someone holding a torch in front of us, trying to illuminate the entire path to the horizon. But because we are so busy moving the torch back and forth, desperate to see what lies ahead, we miss the path directly beneath our feet. We stumble not because the path is dangerous, but because we are too distracted by our own attempt to control the view. You do not need to be a hermit in a mountain courtyard to practice this. You can practice it right where you are. When the thoughts arrive, those heavy, clanking thoughts about what might happen, or what you should have done differently, you can choose to see them as the iron cage. You can recognize that your mind is trying to protect you in the only way it knows how, by holding on tight to the problem. You can offer that part of yourself some grace, acknowledging that it is trying to keep you safe, but you can also recognize that the weight it is asking you to carry is unnecessary. You are not required to believe everything your fear tells you. There is a spaciousness inside you that is larger than any concern you are holding tonight. Imagine that spaciousness as the courtyard itself. It remains calm whether the wind blows or the air is still. It remains steady whether the traveler arrives with a heavy burden or enters with empty hands. Your awareness is that courtyard. It is the vast, silent capacity to notice what is happening without being absorbed by it. When you feel the familiar tension in your chest, that is just the mind trying to pick up the cage again. You do not have to fight the mind. You do not have to scold yourself for being anxious. You can simply notice the tension, acknowledge the story, and then take a breath that allows your shoulders to drop just a little lower. This is the meaning of letting go. It is not abandonment, it is integration. You are integrating the truth that you are capable of handling whatever comes, without needing to carry a cage of potential disasters to keep you company. The future will arrive in its own time, and it will bring its own challenges. But you will meet them with the presence you cultivate now, not the exhaustion you cultivate through rehearsal. The person who is rested, who is grounded, who has learned how to set down the heavy iron of unnecessary worry is far better equipped to navigate the mountain pass than the person who has worn themselves out before the journey has even begun. As you lie here, feel the weight of your body pressing into the surface below. You are not holding anything up right now. The surface is holding you. You are allowed to stop working, stop anticipating, and stop managing the world for just these few hours. Every time a thought tries to draw you back into the clanking, rustnoids of the cage, just label it quietly. You might simply think, this is the weight, or this is the story, or this is just a habit of the mind. Then let your attention drift back to the physical sensations of the room. Notice the rhythm of your breath. Notice the quiet. Notice the fact that in this exact moment, you are perfectly, undeniably safe. The wisdom is in the realization that you are the observer of the cage, not the cage itself. You are the one who has been holding it, which means you are also the one who has the power to set it down. There is no one else who needs to give you permission. The mountains have been waiting for you to walk the path without the burden, not to see what you are carrying, but to see who you are when you are unencumbered, and who you are beneath the layers of protection and the habits of vigilance is already whole. You do not need to be fixed to be worthy of rest. You do not need to solve the mysteries of your life to be allowed to sleep. The silence in this room is not an absence of something you should be doing. It is the presence of the peace you have been walking past all day. It is an invitation, just as the hermit did not force the traveler to set down the cage, but only provided the tea and the space for them to realize the burden for themselves. This practice provides you with a space to simply realize that you are already holding more than you need. The weight of the world is not yours to manage alone. The turning of the seasons, the passage of time, the unfolding of your own life, these things are moving with or without your constant supervision. You can step off the treadmill of your own expectations and find that the world remains intact. In a while, we will explore another story, one that looks more closely at the way we weave our identity through our worries, and what happens when the weaver finally stops the shuttle. But for now, just linger in this recognition. You are a person who has been trying to protect yourself with a very heavy, very unnecessary tool, and you are a person who is now learning, through the simple act of breathing and being, that you have the strength to let that tool fall. There is nothing else you need to do tonight. The most productive thing you can do for your soul, for your mind, and for your body is to simply stop trying to carry the future in your hands. You are safe. You are right here, and you are doing exactly what is needed, which is nothing at all. If it feels right, allow your eyes to close, or simply soften your gaze toward the shadows in the corner of the room. We are going to sit with the iron lantern for a moment, not to carry it, but to truly see it. You do not need to change your breathing or force your body into a position that feels uncomfortable. Simply notice the weight of your own existence, the way the mattress supports your limbs, the way the cool air greets your face, and the way your mind, in this quiet, may still be reaching out to grasp that rusted handle. If you feel a tension in your hands or a tightness in your chest where you usually brace for impact, gently turn your attention to that sensation. You might imagine the iron lantern resting on the floor beside you, right there in the open space of your room. It is a heavy, cold thing, and for years, your palms have been pressed against its metal sides, convinced that if you stop squeezing, the cage will somehow harm you or fail to protect you. Just for these few minutes, invite your fingers to unfold. You do not have to let go of the worry entirely. You only have to loosen the grip. Notice what happens in your shoulders when you imagine the metal slipping just an inch from your skin. Perhaps you feel a flicker of fear when you do this, the fear that if you are not holding the cage, you are leaving yourself exposed. That is natural. That fear is just the ghost of your old habit, whispering that your safety depends on your exhaustion. But notice the sensation of that fear. Where does it live? Is it in the throat, the solar plexus, or maybe behind the eyes. Do not try to move it or dissolve it. Just observe it as a guest, one that has been sitting in your house for a very long time. You can acknowledge its presence without inviting it to stay for the night. As you breathe, imagine the light in the room dimming further, until all the sharpness of the world outside is blurred away. In this softened space, picture the iron cage again. It is sitting on the flagstones of a silent, mossy courtyard. The metal is dull, the basalt stone inside is silent, and the air around it is perfectly still. There is no one there to judge whether you are holding it or not. There is no taskmaster waiting to see if you have performed your duty. You are simply watching the object from a distance. If a thought of tomorrow enters, or if a memory of a past mistake knocks on the door, try to visualize that thought as a small iron key. You do not need to use the key to open the cage. You do not need to use the key to lock it tight. You can simply hold the key in your open palm and let it be what it is, a piece of cold metal. You don't have to put it in the lock. You don't have to search for the door it belongs to. Just acknowledge that the key is there, and then let your focus shift back to the feeling of your chest rising and falling. Every time you find yourself trying to force the future to become clear, recognize that you are reaching for the lantern handle again. When you notice this, you don't need to be frustrated with yourself. Simply say, "I see you, habit, I see you, fear." And then with the gentleness you would show a tired child, let your hands relax. If you feel the need to carry, let that need be seen. But stay with the breath. Let the breath be the anchor. The breath does not require an iron lantern to guide it. It knows the way through the dark without needing to see the path ahead. If it feels right, you might place a hand on your heart, or perhaps on your stomach, where the anxiety often gathers its strength. Feel the warmth of your own skin. This is the only territory you are truly responsible for tonight. You are not responsible for the timing of the world, for the opinions of others, or for the eventual shape of the mountains you have yet to climb. You are responsible only for this, being the witness to your own life, rather than the person shackled to the cage of your own thoughts. Notice the sound of the silence. It is not empty. It is full of the potential for rest. If your mind is still loud, if it is still repeating the stories of what might go wrong, simply imagine these stories as shadows flickering against the wall. They appear, they move, and they pass, just like clouds passing over the moon. You are the sky. You are the space that holds the clouds, but you are not the clouds themselves. The sky does not get bruised by the storm. The sky does not get tired from the rain. The sky simply provides the room for these things to happen. And then inevitably it returns to its own quiet, vast, and steady state. You don't need to do anything with this observation. You don't need to analyze the shape of the shadow or the weight of the lantern. Even noticing that you are noticing is enough. That small, brief moment of recognition where you realize, I am worried right now, is the moment the iron handle begins to rust away. It is the moment you step out of the cage and into the courtyard of your own awareness. Stay with the sensation of the weight on the bed. Feel how the mattress is perfectly capable of holding you. You do not need to hold yourself up. You do not need to hold your life together with your own clenched muscles. You can allow the floor to hold the building, the earth to hold the floor, and the presence of the night to hold you. There is a deep, ancient, and undeniable safety in this surrender. It is not a surrender to defeat. It is a surrender to reality. And reality is far more gentle than your anxiety has ever dared to admit. If the mind wanders back to the lists and the worries, simply bring it back to the touch of your hand on your skin. That contact is real. The warmth is real. The rhythm of your heart is real. The anxiety is just a projection, a mental ghost, a story told in the language of fear. Let the story play if it must, but do not give it your energy. Do not feed it with your attention. Let it be a sound in the distance, like the wind in the trees, something that you hear, but that does not require you to get up and close the window. You are safe enough to soften. You are safe enough to let the iron handle slip from your fingers. You are safe enough to be a person who is simply resting. There is nothing left to solve tonight. The future will wait for you, and it will be there in the morning. But you will meet it as a person who has rested, not as a person who has spent the entire night guarding a cage of empty stone. take one more slow, deep breath, and as you exhale, imagine the tension leaving your hands, flowing out like a river returning to the sea, until there is nothing left but the quiet, simple pulse of your own life. You are doing perfectly well. Just stay with the rhythm, and trust that the night is here to help you put the burden down. Years later, in a province further south where the air turned heavy and fragrant with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, there lived a weaver named Kalen. Kalen was not a traveler of the high passes, but a master of the loom, known for the complexity of the tapestries they created for the local temple. Yet, Kalen's hands were perpetually stained with the dark indigo of a dye that never quite washed away. Kalen did not weave for joy, they wove to outrun the silence of the night. Every thread was a meticulously placed defense against the future, a design of intricate geometric patterns intended to hold the chaos of the world at bay. Kalen believed that if the pattern was perfect, if every thread was taut and every color balanced, then no disaster could touch the life they had built. One evening, an old nun from the mountain heights, a woman who traveled with no more than a satchel and a bamboo staff, arrived at Kalen's workshop. The room was illuminated by the flickering amber light of a single oil lamp, casting long, wavering shadows across the rows of half-finished cloth. Kalen was hunched over the loom, the shuttle flying back and forth with a frantic, rhythmic clack-thrum, clack-thrum. They were working on a tapestry that depicted a wall, a high, impenetrable wall of stone, meant to represent the safety of a mind that is constantly prepared. Kalen did not hear the nun enter. They only felt the sudden, cooling change in the air, a stillness that seemed to press against the frantic pace of the weaving. The nun stood by the door, watching the shuttle dance. She did not speak for a long time. She simply observed the way Kalen's shoulders were pulled toward their ears, the way their jaw was set like iron. Finally, she walked to the center of the room and placed a single, small wooden shuttle on the floor. It was old, smooth from generations of use, and entirely empty. Kalen stopped the loom, the silence in the room feeling sudden and jarring, like a bell that had been muffled in thick cloth. They wiped their indigo-stained hands on their apron and looked at the nun, their breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "I am working on the final corner," Kalen said, their voice tight. "If I stop now, the pattern will be lost." The nun didn't look at the loom. She looked at Kalen's hands. "You are not weaving a pattern," she said, her voice soft and resonant. "You are weaving a barricade, and the more you weave, the more you fear the unraveling." She pointed to the empty shuttle on the floor. "I have been watching the shadows in this room," she continued. "They have been moving across your floor for hours, perfectly content to be there, never needing to be woven into anything permanent. Why do you struggle so hard to make the world stand still?" Kalen looked at the tapestry. It was indeed a beautiful work, but as the nun spoke, it suddenly looked less like a masterpiece and more like a cage. Every thread represented a potential loss they had tried to prevent, a regret they had tried to contain. "I am afraid," Kalen whispered, the admission catching in their throat like a splinter. "I am afraid that if I stop, the fabric of my life will tear. I am afraid that the dark is just waiting for an opening." The nun stepped closer and picked up the empty shuttle. She held it out to Kalen. "This is a tool," she said. "It is meant to be empty so that it can be filled. But you have forgotten that the beauty of the cloth is in the space between the threads, not just the knots." Kalen hesitated, then reached out and took the empty shuttle. It felt light, impossibly light compared to the heavy iron-like tension they had been carrying. The nun turned to the loom and, with a swift, gentle motion, touched the main warp thread, the very foundation of Kalen's work. She did not pull it, but she pressed on it, causing a slight, subtle ripple to travel through the entire tapestry. Kalen gasped, instinctively reaching to fix the flaw, but the nun held up a hand. "Watch," she said. The ripple moved, changed the shape of the pattern for a heartbeat, and then settled into a new, slightly different configuration. It didn't break, it simply shifted. The realization washed over Kalen not as a sudden thunderclap, but as a slow, cooling rain. They had spent years believing that any shift, any change, any unexpected movement was a catastrophe that required their immediate, frantic intervention. They had treated their own life as a static cloth that could be ruined by a single loose thread. But the world was not static. The world was a living, moving loom, and the flaws were not endings. They were simply the way the pattern adapted to the movement of the wind, the passage of time, and the inevitable unfolding of things they could not see. Kalen looked at the indigo stains on their fingers. For the first time, they didn't try to scrub them away. They looked at the tapestry, seeing not a wall of defense but a field of possibilities. They didn't tear the work down. They didn't walk away from their life. Instead, they took a breath, a real, deep, belly-filling breath, and allowed their shoulders to fall into their natural position. They felt the ache in their back, the fatigue in their muscles, and for the first time they accepted it. They were a weaver who was tired, and that was enough. The nun sat on a small stool near the loom. "We weave with what we have," she said, her voice barely louder than the flicker of the oil lamp. "But you do not need to be the one who decides how the pattern must end. You are only the one who guides the thread for this moment." She gestured to the shuttle in Kalen's hand. "If you are afraid of the dark, perhaps it is because you have never sat in it without trying to fill it with your work." Kalen looked at the loom, then at the open doorway where the night air drifted in, cool and smelling of rain. They set the shuttle down. They didn't start the loom again. They didn't feel a sudden magical burst of enlightenment. They felt only a quiet, grounded exhaustion. They felt the reality of their human limitations, and instead of fighting them, they leaned into them. They stood up and walked to the window, watching the way the moonlight played on the garden outside, making no attempt to capture the image, to name it, or to weave it into a pattern. They were simply a person standing in the dark, watching the world exist without their help. There was a subtle change in the room. The shadows no longer looked like threats. They looked like companions, a soft, velvet background that allowed the lamp's light to be what it was. Kalen realized that they had spent a lifetime trying to weave a blanket to keep the winter out, never realizing that the winter was part of the landscape they were already walking through. The terror of the unraveling had been the shadow cast by their own grip. By relaxing the fingers, the grip ceased to be a prison. The nun stood and prepared to leave. She did not give Kalen a secret word or a fineful lesson. She only paused at the threshold and looked back. "The thread you hold is not the life you live," she said. "Do not confuse the two." Kalen nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. They didn't rush to reply. They simply stayed there in the quiet. As the nun disappeared into the garden, they were still Kellen the weaver, and their hands were still stained with dye, but the frantic, clacking rhythm in their chest had finally slowed to a pulse. In the days that followed, Kalen did not stop weaving, but the work was different. They began to leave spaces in the tapestry, intentionally allowing the light of the workshop to pass through the cloth. They stopped trying to outrun the night. When a thread snapped, they didn't panic. They simply paused, took a breath, and tied the knot with a steady hand. They had learned that the pattern was not something they were creating in isolation. It was a conversation they were having with the world. And sometimes the most important part of the conversation was the silence. As you listen to this, consider the loom in your own mind. You have been weaving your own protective patterns, stitch by stitch, day by day, convinced that if you stop, the whole structure will come undone. You have been working so hard to ensure that everything remains exactly as you planned. But notice what happens when you imagine yourself setting the shuttle down, just for a moment, just to feel the weight of your own hands without the tool. You are not losing your identity. You are not losing your purpose. You are simply finding the courage to let the pattern shift, to allow the light to pass through, and to see that you are perfectly safe, even when the weave is loose, even when the night is dark, and even when you have no idea what the next stitch will be. You are doing exactly what is needed, which is nothing more than this: breathing, resting, and letting the work of the day fall away. The reason you have felt so tired for so long is not because you are failing to manage your life, but because you have been living as if you are the architect of every outcome. You have been trying to build a fortress out of thoughts, believing that if you can just anticipate every crack, every shift, and every shadow in the foundation, you will finally be safe. This is the mechanism of control. It is a tireless, exhausting labor, and it creates a specific kind of suffering that is entirely separate from the events of your actual life. When something difficult happens, a disappointment, a moment of uncertainty, a feeling of being overwhelmed, that is the first pain. It is the inevitable friction of being a human being in a world that is always changing. It hurts, it is uncomfortable. But often, we do not stop there. Instead, the mind immediately begins to construct a narrative around that pain. We ask, why did this happen to me? Or how could I have been so foolish? Or if this isn't fixed by tomorrow, everything will fall apart. This narrative is the second pain. It is the arrow we fire into ourselves after the first has already landed. The second pain is fed by judgment, by the desperate need for approval, and by the fear that if we stop rehearsing the future, we will lose our grip on reality. You have been turning your pain into an identity. You have been using the discomfort of the present moment as fuel to run a marathon that never ends. Convinced that if you just work hard enough, if you worry hard enough, if you plan hard enough, you will eventually reach a finish line where you are finally allowed to be peaceful. But look at the empty shuttle on Kalen's floor. Look at the iron cage discarded in the courtyard. They represent the realization that the shuttle does not create the cloth, and the cage does not create the security. We suffer because we believe that our internal struggle is the same thing as responsibility. We think that if we are not anxious, we do not care. We think that if we are not judging ourselves for our mistakes, we are not learning from them. This is the great misunderstanding of the weary heart. The truth is that judgment does not teach you, it only wounds you. Shame does not correct your path, it only obscures it. When you treat your thoughts as commands, you are giving away the sovereignty of your own mind. You are acting as if every anxious forecast, every fearful replay of the past, is an objective fact that requires your immediate, heavy-handed intervention. The Buddhist perspective invites you to see this differently. It suggests that you are not the thoughts you have, you are the awareness that notices them. There is a vast difference between being caught in the grip of a worry and recognizing that a worry is passing through. When you are caught, you are the worrying, you are the anxiety. Your whole world becomes the size of that fear. But when you recognize the worry, you create a space. You become the courtyard. You become the workshop. You become the vast, unshakable sky that holds the clouds but is never damaged by the storm. This is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It is about becoming steady. It is about realizing that you can be compassionate towards yourself without being a prisoner to your own self-criticism. Consider how often you replay conversations from years ago, trying to change the tone of your voice or the look on someone's face. You are trying to weave a different pattern into a tapestry that is already finished. That energy is precious. It is the energy of your life, the very stuff of your heartbeat and your breath. When you spend it on the past, you are effectively absent from your own existence. And when you spend it on the future, obsessively guarding against what if, you are effectively absent from your own peace. You are so busy managing the possibilities that you are missing the reality. And the reality, however messy, however uncertain, is the only place where you can actually live. Many of us were taught that peace is a reward. We were taught that if we suffer enough, if we worry enough, if we prove ourselves worthy enough, then, eventually peace will be granted to us. But peace is not a trophy for the exhausted. Peace is the natural state of the mind when it is not being dragged in 10 different directions by the need to control. It is not the absence of difficulty. If you wait for your life to be free of difficulty before you allow yourself to be at peace, you will wait forever. Life is inherently dynamic, shifting, and unpredictable. Peace is not found by smoothing out the world, it is found by softening the way you meet the world. It is a different relationship with difficulty. It is the ability to say, this is difficult, and I am hurting, and I can be here with myself in the midst of it, without needing to tear myself apart. You have been using your shame as a tool for discipline. You think that if you are hard on yourself, you will be better, you will be safer, you will be more prepared. But shame is a heavy, rusted tool that only creates more shame. It is like trying to fix a broken loom with a hammer. It shatters the very thing it is meant to mend. Real discipline, the kind that leads to transformation, is rooted in compassion. It is the quiet, steady resolve to keep returning to the present moment, even when you have been distracted, even when you have been caught in the grip of the iron cage. It is the gentle hand that says, I see that you are struggling. I see that you are scared, and I am here with you. When you begin to shift your relationship with these patterns, you will find that you don't need to change who you are. You only need to change what you identify with. You are not the anxiety. You are the space in which the anxiety occurs. You are not the fear of the future. You are the consciousness that perceives the future. This is the great liberation, to realize that you can have a thought, you can feel an emotion, and you do not have to become that thought or that emotion. You can let them be what they are. You can let them arrive. You can let them stay as long as they need to, and you can let them leave. Just like the shadows that move across the floor of the workshop, unbidden and ultimately harmless. Notice how your body feels when you hear this. Does the chest feel a little less tight? Do the shoulders drop just a fraction further? This is your body responding to the truth. Your body knows that it has been carrying too much. Your body knows that it is tired of holding the shield. You do not have to fight the night. You do not have to fight the silence. You do not have to fight the fact that tomorrow is still coming. You only have to be here with the weight of your own existence, in the quiet shelter of your own breath. The work you have been doing, the work of being human, the work of trying to stay safe, the work of carrying the burden has been observed. You are allowed to set it down. You are allowed to be a person who is simply resting, without a list, without a plan, without a cage. You are doing well. Just feel the stability of the surface beneath you. It has been there the entire time, waiting for you to trust it. You can let the tension go. There is nothing left to solve tonight, and the world is far more capable of holding itself than your thoughts have ever dared to admit. The transition from the quiet of the workshop to the bustle of your ordinary days is where the real practice begins. It is easy to find a kind of grace when you are lying in the dark, listening to the rhythm of a story about mountain hermits and ancient looms. But when you are standing in the middle of a Tuesday, staring at a screen, waiting for a reply that refuses to come, the iron lantern often feels much heavier than it did an hour ago. You might be checking your phone for reassurance, hoping that a single notification will settle the flutter in your chest. When it doesn't arrive, you may find your mind immediately beginning to weave a story that you have been forgotten, that you have done something wrong, that the silence is a sign of rejection. In that moment, notice the familiar weight in your hand. That is the lantern handle. You are not waiting for a text. You are waiting for a certainty that does not exist. Instead of following the thread of that panic, try taking one breath before you reach for the screen again. Just one. That breath is not a solution to the silence, but it is a way of reclaiming your own center. It is an act of recognizing that you can exist in the uncertainty without immediately needing to fill it with a defensive story. Maybe you find yourself lying awake at 3 in the morning, replaying a mistake you made weeks ago. You are back in the conversation, polishing your sentences, trying to imagine how you could have been sharper, kinder, or more confident. You are trying to reweave the tapestry of a day that has already been cut from the loom. This is the habit of the weaver who fears the unraveling. You believe that if you analyze the error long enough, you will prevent it from happening again. But this is the second pain, the arrow you fire into yourself to make up for the mistake that already happened. When you catch yourself doing this, try to visualize the mistake as a single, misaligned thread in a pattern that is miles long. It does not ruin the tapestry. It is simply a part of the history of the work. You do not need to pull the thread out. You do not need to burn the cloth. You can simply acknowledge that the mistake is there, forgive yourself for being human, and let your focus return to the texture of your pillow, the heaviness of your limbs, and the fact that you are safe in this room right now. There is often a quiet, pervasive pressure to feel like you are behind in life, that others have figured out the pattern while yours remains unfinished. You might feel the pressure to perform happiness, to wear a mask of competence even when you are feeling hollow or fragile. You smile at colleagues, you offer help to friends, you maintain the appearance of the strong pillar. But inside, you feel the strain of holding up a roof that is already perfectly supported. This is the exhaustion of the painted mask. It is the effort of maintaining a version of yourself that is meant for the outside world, at the expense of the person who just needs to be human. You don't have to be the pillar. You are allowed to be the space around the pillar. You are allowed to admit that you are tired, to say I don't know yet, or to simply stop weaving for an evening. Your worth is not a finished tapestry. It is not something you have to earn through your output, your efficiency, or the perfection of your composure. It is inherent, and it is here, whether you are productive or still. Consider the times you feel the sudden, sharp need to control a relationship, to force an outcome because you are terrified of losing the connection. You might find yourself over-explaining, apologizing, or checking in too often, all in an effort to keep the thread taut. But when you pull a thread too tight, you don't strengthen the cloth, you make it brittle, you make it prone to snapping. Real connection is found in the spaces where there is no tension. It is found when you can allow the other person to be who they are, without needing them to fulfill a role in your internal map of safety. You can care deeply without gripping tightly. You can offer love without making it a transaction. This requires a specific kind of courage, the courage to risk being seen without a defense, and the courage to trust that you are enough, even if the other person doesn't mirror your efforts exactly as you expected. You may also struggle with the feeling that you have not earned your rest, that if you aren't constantly solving, analyzing, or preparing, you are being irresponsible. You might feel guilty for sitting in a park without a book, or for closing your eyes before the house is perfectly clean. This is the belief that rest is a reward to be unlocked, rather than a fundamental necessity of the living body. You do not have to earn the right to exist. You do not have to prove your value to the universe before you are allowed to close your eyes. When that guilt arises, treat it like an old rattling cage. Acknowledge that the guilt is a habit, a voice from the past that equates survival with struggle. You can choose to set it down. You can choose to rest simply because you are breathing. And the body, like the earth, requires seasons of fallow time to remain vibrant. It is helpful to remember that mindfulness is not an escape from these modern pressures. It is a way to inhabit them differently. A breath before you answer an email is not a waste of time. It is a form of wisdom that protects your peace. Choosing not to engage in a toxic spiral of comparison when you see someone else's highlight reel on a screen is not weakness, it is a profound act of self-discipline. You are creating a boundary between the world's noise and your own internal sanctuary. Every time you consciously return to the present moment, you are choosing to walk the path without the iron lantern. You are saying, I will meet the future when it arrives, but for now I am here. Even in the smallest moments, the way you hold a cup of tea, the way you listen to the sound of rain, the way you walk through a doorway, you can practice this. You do not need to leave your life to find the temple. The temple is the awareness you bring to these moments. When you feel the familiar pull to worry, pause and ask yourself, is this worry helping me? Is it solving anything? Or is it just the rhythm of the cage, clanking against the floor? If it is the cage, then let it sit. You do not have to carry it. You can step away, you can soften your jaw, and you can let the silence of the room be your guide. This does not mean the difficulties of your life will vanish. The rent will still be due, the conversations will still be complex, and the future will remain unwritten. But you will meet these things with a different spirit. You will meet them as someone who is rooted, someone who knows that their identity is not tied to their problems. You will meet them with the quiet, steady strength of a weaver who understands that the beauty of the work is in the gaps, the shifts, and the willingness to let the pattern change. You are learning that you are not the weaver of the world's destiny. You are the one who gets to participate in the tapestry for a brief, precious span of time. And that is enough. It is more than enough. Stay with this feeling of lightness. The next moments are yours to simply inhabit, without trying to capture them or mold them into something they are not yet. You are doing perfectly well, and the night is holding you with a gentleness you are finally ready to receive. The iron lantern grows heavier, only if you insist on holding it to light a path that is already perfectly visible by the moonlight of your own awareness. You have been walking through this mountain pass for so long, bracing your shoulders, locking your elbows, and keeping your eyes fixed on that rusted, cold iron in your hand. But look at the shadows on the floor of your room. Look at the way the light filters in through the window, soft and silver, revealing the path without a single spark of your own effort. The darkness, you were so afraid of the darkness that seemed like a void to be filled with your worry, has turned out to be the very cradle that allows the world to rest. You can let the lantern fall now. It will make no sound as it hits the soft earth, because the earth itself is patient, and the path does not require your protection. There is a deep, resonant stillness waiting for you in the center of your own breathing. It is not a silence you have to create by force. It is the silence that remains when you stop adding your own internal noise to the room. Feel the weight of your body as it settles deeper into the surface beneath you. The tension that once held your frame in a state of constant, rigid readiness is finally beginning to unspool, like thread dropping from a loom that has been silenced at the end of the day. You do not need to hold the fabric together anymore. The weaver has left the room. The loom is still. The threads are resting in the cool air, untangled and at peace. Let your hands relax fully and completely. If you were holding a key or a handle or a secret stone, let it slip away into the dark. Your palms are soft now, open to the night. There is no task remaining. There is no list to be audited in the silence of your mind. Even the memory of the cage, and the memory of the struggle, and the memory of the mountain path are beginning to blur at the edges, dissolving into the gentle, velvet gray of the oncoming sleep. You are safe enough to simply be here, existing in the space between one breath and the next, where time does not matter, and the future has no invitation to enter. Everything that needs to be done has been left for another season. Your life does not require your constant, anxious supervision in order to unfold. Just as the mountain mist flows around the stone without asking permission, the events of your life will find their own rhythm, and you will be ready to meet them because you are finally learning to be present. You have done more than enough today. You have carried the weight of your worry until it lost its meaning, and in that loss you found the freedom to set it down. That is the only victory that matters. That is the only arrival you were ever meant to seek. The shadows in the room are deepening, becoming a protective, dark blanket that invites you to drop your gaze and close your eyes. Your thoughts, which were once like birds beating their wings against a window, have found their way to the branch. They are quiet, they are still. They are no longer asking for your attention, and you are no longer obligated to give it to them. You are sinking into the foundation of your own being, a place where there is no duality between the observer and the observed, no distance between the seeker and the truth. You are the space where the night happens, and in that space there is no fear. There is a warmth spreading from the center of your chest, a gentle heat that radiates outward to your fingertips and your toes, melting away the last vestiges of the iron-cold grip you maintained for so long. You are becoming as light as the mist that swirls around the mountain pass. You are becoming as fluid as the water in the hermit's bowl. You are becoming the silence itself. The air in the room is cool and fresh, tasting of deep, undisturbed woods, and as you breathe it in, you are filling your lungs with the very stillness of the universe. Nothing can disturb this. Nothing can claim this. This is your own sanctuary, constructed not of walls or defenses, but of the simple, honest realization that you were never the one who had to carry the world. Trust the darkness now. It is not an adversary. It is the vast open ocean where you can finally float. Let go of the need to understand, the need to remember, the need to prepare. The morning will come in its own time, bringing its own light, and it will find you restored, steady, and unburdened. For now, there is only the slow, rhythmic pulse of your heart, a sound as ancient as the mountains, marking the passage of a rest that is deep, restorative, and complete. Every muscle in your face is loose, every worry in your mind has turned to mist, and the only thing left is the gentle, floating sensation of drifting off into the calm. You have walked far enough. You have carried the lantern long enough. The night is quiet, and the path ahead is already lit by the stars that you don't even have to look at to know they are there. You are returning to the quiet, unlit center, where the weaver no longer worries about the pattern, and the traveler no longer wonders about the destination. You are simply here, and here is enough. You are simply alive, and that is enough. You are simply resting, and that is finally, perfectly enough. What if the peace you have been wandering through all your life was never a destination, but the very ground that was holding you up while you looked for it?